Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 325. I am so thrilled to have back on the show Dr. Ritamarie. She was in episode 304. We talked about nutritional endocrinology. It was so much fun having her on the show. We absolutely said we had to have her back. And today we're going to talk about balancing blood sugar, the healthy form of the ketogenic diet, and so much more. Dr. Ritamarie, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me back. Yeah, we had so much fun last time. I've been looking forward to coming back.
Absolutely. Now, you had shared with us a few elixirs for energy and for hormone balance, and those are in episode 304 in the show notes, so people can, listeners can grab those links. They're free elixirs that you gave to us. They're delicious and they improve our energy naturally by nutrifying the body. I love them. I highly encourage listeners to check them out. I'll make sure that those links are also in today's show notes as well, so that everyone can grab all of your goodies. You give away so much free information. And in fact, your keto challenge that's coming up this week, you're also giving away, it's a free 5-day challenge that you're doing through, is it a Facebook group? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So we're hosting it in our Facebook group, but it's also through email. So we'll be sending out emails daily with content. The content will be a combination of a video and then a PDF that supports whatever the training is in that particular video. And then in the Facebook group is where people can interact. You're going to get a little assignment every day because the challenge puts things into action. And then we're going to have contests every day. So the people that post the most and have the most breakthroughs are going to have an opportunity to win. Every day we're going to be giving away a $25 Amazon gift card. And then on the final day, we're giving away a $2,000 grand prize, which is a seat in one of my classes called Body Balance. And Body Balance is like, incorporates all my different programs and helps you to empower yourself to be your own healer and then support your thyroid, adrenals, blood sugar, and digestion. So it's a $2,000 course and we're giving it away to the lucky winner.
That's very cool. That's awesome. So we'll make sure the links to all of that are in the show notes today, so we can make sure that listeners get to join your challenge. And even if they're listening to this and your challenge has already started, they can still jump in, watch the videos, and do it. Now, keto is a hot topic. It's kind of controversial because there are professionals on both sides of the fence saying keto is damaging to the body. It's really unhealthy. You know, you can't live on eggs and bacon and butter and expect to have long-term health. And then there's people on the other side of the fence going, this is like the world's best way to eat. My husband and I did keto and I think we did it wrong, because I ended up with liver damage and my husband ended up with kidney damage. And we had to then use food as medicine and go more on a whole foods, plant-based diet, and we reversed those issues. But seeing our blood work trend in the wrong direction was a big eye-opener that we really, if we're done wrong, if you just jump on YouTube, watch a few videos or read a book and then do keto, and you're not following the advice of a doctor who's looking to help you heal your body, you could end up damaging your body. So you can do keto wrong. And I know that you're very passionate about teaching people how to do it right.
Absolutely. And people think whole foods, plant-based diet, ketogenic diet, they're complete opposites. And in reality, you can do a whole food, plant-based diet in a way that puts you into ketosis. And ketosis is not for everybody. And there's some definite things that we're warning people at the beginning. How do you know if it's not for you? But the things you described, which is liver issues and kidney issues, are among the major problems that can happen, the major dangers. And the reason is because I call it the butter and bacon diet. People are going, I can eat butter and bacon all day long and drink coffee with butter in it, and I'm going to do well. And that's not the way it should work. And I've done keto. Most of the time I'm in ketosis on a whole food plant-based diet. And it's just a matter of knowing how your body is processing carbohydrates, not making an arbitrary number like you got to keep your carb content under 10 grams a day, which you can't really have a healthy diet and keep it that way. And some people may need to get that low to get into ketosis initially, but I don't think they do. I think they can use intermittent fasting and other things to get them started in that. So that's why I got passionate. I saw so many people teaching this, and I just cringe when I see these pictures of what people are eating. And I know what the short-term and long-term damage is from that. So I decided to do what I call a healthy keto diet, which will help people to do it, get the benefits of ketosis, and there are a lot of them, and do it in a whole food plant-based way.
Now, I just had Dr. Alan Christensen on the show talking about thyroid health, and I know you are such an expert in also thyroid health. He warns that the ketogenic diet may uncover or stimulate autoimmune thyroid issues because they see that when they do it with children, like for children with epilepsy, that it has a it has been known to cause thyroid problems. So I'd love for you to dispel the myths or maybe explain why is it that some doctors think that the ketogenic diet is unhealthy for thyroid?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I like the way you said it initially. You said uncover thyroid issues, because usually there's people who end up going down a route of getting thyroid issues from any kind of diet intervention would be because they have this genetic propensity, and then you create this environment that brings it out. So the way that a ketogenic diet is typically done is it's tons of oil, number one, not whole food plant-based fats, not whole food fats, but oil, lots and lots of oil, which is just like white flour, a fractured food, a processed food that's deficient in everything else. All it has is fat, just like white flour is pretty much all it has is carb. And so you take away the nutrients. And so with what I'm proposing, which is a little very different, I don't see a lot of people doing it this way. I don't see hardly anybody doing it this way. We're providing the macro and micronutrients that the thyroid needs. So when you go on a typical ketogenic diet, where's the magnesium coming from? Magnesium comes from green leafy vegetables for the most part. So yeah, maybe they're eating chocolate and they're getting a little magnesium that way, but there's not a lot of magnesium. There's not a lot of the antioxidants and the micronutrients that the thyroid needs to be healthy. And it's a stress. You're eating all that fat and putting a lot of strain on the system. You're not allowing the body to go in. Now, not to say that it may be problematic for some people. And also, I don't believe that a ketogenic diet is necessarily meant for long-term use, unless it is in retractable seizures. So you've got a person and you've got to do the trade-off. Do they have a thyroid problem and have to go on thyroid medication, or do they have seizures all day long, right? Sometimes in health, we have to make that choice. Like these are the choices. This is the lesser of two evil. The same way when someone goes on a medication, which has a lot of side effects, but it's keeping them alive, right? Dead with no side effects or alive with some side effects, we make choices that way. So I'm not going to say that it can affect the thyroid. I'm just saying that the traditional way that it's done is so devoid in foods that are good for us. Like, for example, people are teaching keep your carbs under 10 grams a day. Well, how much vegetable matter can you do with less than 10 grams a day of carb? Not a whole lot. Right? So what they're doing is loading up on oils and meat and lard and other things like that with very little in the way of the protective nutrients.
Right. So their goal is only to get into ketosis, and the problem with that is their body is not getting the fuel it needs to protect itself and build healthy new cells.
Absolutely.
So maybe let's back up and explain, like, what is ketosis? Why is that a good thing to do? Like, maybe just for those who keep hearing this buzzword ketosis or keto diet, but we don't really understand what are the benefits of being in the state called ketosis.
Sure, absolutely. So we have fuel that the body needs to burn for energy, and all of our cells need energy. We need energy to run and jump and hide, but we also need energy for cellular metabolism, for taking in nutrients, doing your cell, whatever that cell's particular process function is, and eliminating waste. And so we have a choice between fat or sugar. Basically, you can be a fat burner or a sugar burner. Most people are in the mode of sugar burner, right? We eat meals, it raises the glucose. Most people eat too much glucose in a meal or too much starch, lots of glucose, plenty of that, and then gets eliminated. Well, the big problem with that is high levels of insulin. And when people are eating a diet that where they're sugar burners, and especially if they're eating regularly throughout the day as opposed to discrete meals, they are needing to keep that level of sugar up, and it keeps the level of insulin, which can be damaging. And we can talk more about that in a little bit. But what really is happening there is that when you're relying on sugar for fuel, you're constantly relying on grabbing it from outside. We have just so much glycogen that we can burn down. The body tries to preserve it, which is a stored form of sugar, and people get hungry in between meals. With fat, when you're relying on fat for fuel, it does so in the way of ketone bodies. The fat doesn't get converted to sugar. It actually is burned in the form of ketone bodies, which is a byproduct of fat. And when these ketones are burned, when we're efficient at burning these ketones, it's easy to find them because even if you're not eating anything at all, most of us have some extra stores of fat, a lot of extra stores of fat on the body. We've got maybe a couple of thousand calories at most of extra glycogen, which is the stored starch sugar form, and some of it's in the muscles, most of it's in the liver. And in terms of fat, most of us have a whole lot more than that. We have enough fat on our bodies to last for weeks or months even. So the body gets efficient, and so it's not constantly hungry. It goes, oh, I'm in fat burning mode and ain't nothing coming in. So let me go after the hips or the thighs or the belly fat. And this is the benefit that so many people are doing it for, is the weight loss. That it actually finally helps them to lose weight without constantly being in sugar and starch craving mode. So that's really where ketos come from. But the thing about it is it's good. It's fuel for the brain in that it helps with memory and focus and repair of the brain, and actually helps to calm down the nervous system. And it was developed for seizure disorders to help calm down the nervous impulses in the brain so people didn't have seizures. It was originally done just under the supervision of doctors, and it was mapped out in kind of similar to the way it's done today, but people were monitored, right? On and on monitored. And what's happening now, it's become a popular diet, and people are not monitoring themselves, and they're not being monitored. They're just going into this mode. If they do it wrong, most people end up taking in too much protein, because ketogenic diet's not a high protein diet, it's a high fat diet. And so all that extra protein can create nitrogenous waste, put a load on the kidneys, and also take the person out of ketosis.
Right, because we convert it to sugar. We like to our body likes to convert. Our body likes sugar burning better. It's kind of like a car that can run on gasoline or diesel but prefers gasoline, or runs better on gasoline. It would prefer gasoline. So our body prefers sugar. And so if we're eating more Atkins style, which is what I always, anytime I've done keto in the past, if I am not like super on top of watching and like measuring and paying attention to what I eat, I will shift into an Atkins diet where it's just like, pass me another slab of bacon or whatever, right? Pass me another pork chop with the bacon. And then what happens is the body takes that protein, the extra protein that we ate, and converts it to sugar. And then that's kind of defeating the whole point and making it more of a pro-inflammatory experience. I heard once, one of the first times I ever heard keto was from a naturopath who was doing a program in her clinic, and she took a bunch of clients, like 25 or 50 clients. They did lots of labs before, and every month she was monitoring them. I can't remember the name of the machine, but where you lie down and they hook electrodes up to you and it tests what your lean body mass is to make sure
Oh,
you're
yeah,
not
yeah. The
losing.
bioimpedance device. Yep.
So what is it called?
It's called bioimpedance.
Great. So that they would make sure that you're not losing muscle mass, you're only losing fat mass. Because if done wrong, if you do this diet wrong, you could start losing a bit of muscle mass. So they were really very closely monitoring their patients. And the first thing they saw was chronic pain went away. Even those with arthritis, the pain went away. Their inflammatory markers came down. They, obviously began to lose weight. Hormones began to balance. And she started becoming like raving about this diet. Like it is the best, is the cure-all diet, right? But it has to be done monitored, like you said. Why is it that it decreases inflammation? Is it that the being in ketosis decreases inflammation, or is it the fact that they stopped eating foods that cause inflammation?
Yeah, great question. So, by design, a ketogenic diet doesn't have grains in it. It doesn't have gluten. So, a lot of people are sensitive to gluten and other grains. Corn's way up there: gluten, dairy, corn, soy, eggs, and peanuts. And on a true ketogenic diet, we're maybe doing eggs, maybe doing meat, but dairy is usually not there because dairy is high in sugar, lactose, and the gluten and the corn are out and the soy is out. So four of the top six allergens right away are off the chart. So that could be part of it. Another part is we're eating less, and a lot of times the grains, when people get their guts irritated and they have leaky gut, a lot of times due to gluten or other things they're intolerant to, that every time they eat, they're creating an inflammatory response, and this may not.
Mm-hmm.
My concern with the butter bacon version of it is very high in a fat called arachidonic acid, which is a pro-inflammatory fat. And so if you look back at, some of the diets that have evolutionarily been popular over the last few decades, the zone diet, right? We're going to get in the zone. Well, they focus on not having too much of this arachidonic acid and the eicosanoids, which come from it, that produce inflammation. So I think some of it is that we're depleting some of our stores. But the typical way it's done, it actually is done with pro-inflammatory fats. So I think when it's done properly and we're doing it with anti-inflammatory fats and we're doing it with a lot of antioxidant rich, low carbohydrate vegetables, then we get the best of both worlds.
You say that butter is high in arachidonic acid. What about ghee, which is clarified butter? Is that also high in arachidonic acid?
Yeah, I believe it is because clarified butter actually just has the carbohydrate and protein pulled out of it. Like there's no remnants of that. So it's
Mm-hmm.
pure fat. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it is. Most of the animal fats are. The things that are not high in arachidonic acid are fish, deep ocean fish, and most vegetables and nuts and seeds, with the exception of peanuts. Peanuts are high in arachidonic acid. So, and it's not just the intake of arachidonic acid per se, but it's also the nutrient density as well. We take in fats that are short term. I may be getting a little too geeky science wise here, but I know you liked that last time, so I'll
Yes.
go there. You can just pull me back if I get too deep. But there's fats that we eat that are the short chain fats, and there's ones that are essential the body can't make, and those are the omega-6 and 3, or alpha linoleic and linoleic acid, and they get converted to longer chain fats. And those longer chain fats like EPA and DHA, which we hear a lot about, GLA, we hear a lot about EPA, DHA, especially because they have anti-inflammatory effects on the body. DHA is really good for the brain and membranes and blood sugar balance. And when they get converted, in order to get converted, they need to have certain nutrients that are available, bioavailable. So we get this reaction where the fats we eat turn into either or a combination of pro or anti-inflammatory chemicals. And there's a whole,
Mm.
pathway and biochemical pathway you can look at for that. I think they go into a little bit of that in the zone diet because that's what they're focusing on. These eicosanoids, which are downstream from those fats, get converted into these pro or anti-inflammatory chemicals. So just the bottom line is the foods that have high levels of arachidonic acid are the eggs, cheese, full fat dairy products, and meat, less so in the free range and pastured type of meats than there would be in commercially raised. Those are very high because those animals are fed grains, which are high in the omega 6, which can get converted into arachidonic acid. So you can get the arachidonic acid in the food, but you can also eat the foods that tend to get converted, and those would be the omega 6 type grains and nuts and seeds. So when I do keto with people, I'm really careful, or any kind of diet that has a fair amount of fat, I'm really working with them to not only eat good sources, whole food plant-based fats that aren't contaminated, but also to look at the balance between omega 3 and 6.
I love that you brought up this point of trace nutrients that are needed to support the body to take the fats and convert them into the longer chain fats that are anti-inflammatory. What foods should we make sure that we eat to get those nutrients?
Yeah, so whole foods, right? So vegetables, nut, fruits, and and on keto, you're careful that you don't do too high a sugar fruit because it pulls you out of ketosis. So it's figuring it out for each person, right? Some people can eat pineapple and they don't take them out of ketosis, and somebody eats blueberries and it does. So you have to just look at that. But it's those pigmented, highly pigmented fruits and vegetables that are loaded with the B vitamins, the vitamin C, the various minerals, sea vegetables, things like that, that are really nutrient dense and actually low calorie. Those are the ones that help to support those conversion pathways. And there's a lot of research and papers that say, no, humans can't convert these short chain omega 3s and 6s into the longer chain efficiently, that the pathway is only about 10% efficient. Well, when you look at the nutrients that are required, it's because the food supply that most people are eating is so deficient in those nutrients because it's processed and there's a lot of sugar and starch and white flour and all this stuff that's missing those nutrients. People are not eating sea
Right.
vegetables, and the soils are really depleted in minerals, and the best source is actually from the sea. But then you have to be careful of contamination, that you don't tax the nervous system and tax the liver, the detoxification pathways.
Right. That is the crux of it. Is we've been living off of this thinking that, even thinking, oh, but my whole wheat bread, I mean, it's whole grains. It says it's 12 grains, or it says it's 7 grains and it's organic, and isn't that's healthy, right? We need to wrap our brains around that anything that's processed, like oil, flour, even if it's organic and it says whole grain, the second you make a flour, you are removing nutrients out of it.
Absolutely.
When you make an oil, you're actually removing, so, like, for example, I love using olives, but olive oil is so healthy for you, isn't it? And I'm like, well, can't you just eat the olives? Like, you're taking away 99% of all the benefits by throwing away the olive and extracting just the oil, right?
Exactly.
What do you think? Do you think we should eat some olives if we want the healthy benefits
Yeah.
from olives?
If you want the healthy benefits of olives, yeah, eat the olives. I'm not saying that nobody should ever eat oil, or a little sprinkling on your salad or whatever, but the quantities that people are doing. And what really bugs me, and this is just a pet peeve of mine, when I hear people talk about eating healthy fats, right? They never talk about whole food fats. They talk about oil. Oh, so some healthy fats are olive oil and avocado oil and coconut oil. And I'm like, well, what about olives and coconuts and avocados? Those are the real source. Now, there are times therapeutically when you have somebody who's very small capacity to eat, their gut is really inflamed and they're very thin and they're losing
Mm,
weight, where oil can be a very therapeutic tool. But
mm-hmm.
honey, that ain't the majority of people, I hate to tell you. Most people are not struggling with how to gain weight. They're struggling with, how do I get rid of the excess?
The catch-22 is that those who are overweight are undernourished.
Mostly, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because the nutrient dense foods are deficient in one thing generally: calories. So you need to add to those nutrient dense foods foods that are calorie rich, but also contain nutrients. So I like to huge salads and veggie, non-starchy veggies with good fats,
Mm-hmm.
avocados, olives, coconut, nuts and seeds, preferably soaked and sprouted, definitely not heated. When you heat oils, you create oxidative byproducts, and different oils have different extents to which the damage happens. But those oxidative byproducts, if anybody's heard of free radicals, cause free radical damage to the
Mm-hmm.
cells. And we want to avoid that as much as possible. So when I look at, I don't know, some of the keto pancakes and keto this and keto that, and they're using nut flours instead of grain flours, but they're sticking them in the oven at high temperatures. And those fats are delicate and they don't survive those high temperatures, and they create negative byproducts. So they create trans fats, oxidized fats, and just products that are not healthy for people.
What about MCT oil?
Okay, there you go. There's MCT. First of all, coconut oil is taken from coconut. So that's a fractured food. MCT is just part of the coconut. Now, not to say that I don't use it therapeutically in some cases to actually help people either get into ketosis faster or to support healing their gut or their brain. MCT is medium chain triglycerides. It doesn't seem to be so sensitive to the heat because it's saturated. And when fats are saturated, they aren't as delicate and sensitive to the heat. So there are some oils, some fats that can be heated to a modest extent without a lot of damage. MCT, the medium chain triglycerides, have been found to help support healing of the brain and help support healing of the gut. But again, they also cause diarrhea when you first start taking them. So you can't just say, here, put a tablespoon of MCT oil on your salad, and the person's going to be in the bathroom if they don't adapt to it slowly. But yeah, there are definite therapeutic benefits to MCT oil. But, we're not going to just take the average person and put them on 6 tablespoons a day of MCT oil.
Right. So we're coming back to this idea that food's medicine. I like to think about it. It's sort of a mind shift to go, everything you put in your mouth is like, imagine a drug or an herb, right?
Mm-hmm.
Has a set of effects. Sometimes we call them side effects. It can be a positive effect, and sometimes it could be an undesirable effect. Well, food is the same. So I could take sweet potato or rice, and for some people, that is a therapeutic and they like the effects because that's
Yeah,
what they needed. And for other people, because their body, the disease state that they're in, they would have negative effects.
absolutely.
And so we're looking at that all food has effects. And if we can put on this way of thinking, shift our mind to every single thing we put in our mouth is either going to be healing or neutral or damaging, depending on where we are at this very moment, then we can adjust. So MCT oil has a set of effects like any processed oil is not going to deliver all the nutrients that the whole food would.
Right.
And it could potentially bring in oxidative damage because any oil, any fat that's been rendered and exposed to oxygen brings with it oxidative damage. So there are a set of negative effects that come with that. And when used specifically for people that need a specific therapy, like someone who, I don't know, needs a drug, we're like, okay, I'm sorry, here's the long list of side effects with this drug, but it's gonna really help at this moment.
Yeah, it's going to keep you alive.
Right.
Okay, so take it,
So
right?
so
I'm going to
MCT
miss
oil,
having headaches.
yeah, exactly. So we know that certain times MCT oil can benefit that person, but they also have to know the set of effects that comes with it. So ketogenic diet can be done wrong 100 ways and probably done right one way.
Mm-hmm.
And you're teaching people how to navigate that so they do it the right way to nutrify the body as much as possible and get the body in this state where it's not burning sugar for fuel but burning its own fat for fuel. Are there byproducts? So like I imagine a internal combustion engine. My son, who's about to be 4, is fascinated with anything that has to do with anything that moves on wheels. And he loves to look at the smoke coming out of a car and goes, look, there's smoke. And so we're talking about, the car is burning fuel, and that's the exhaust, that's the byproduct. Is there a byproduct of burning fat for fuel in the body? Like, does it increase acid, or is there any kind of byproduct that we should be concerned about?
Well, yeah, okay, that's a great question. So, number one, when we eat a lot of fat, we're putting a lot of demand on the liver and the gallbladder to produce and then release bile to help with the digestion. So, it certainly can put a strain on the liver. People who have had their gallbladders removed, I would really be cautious before undertaking a ketogenic diet and go very slowly, right? And think about what are the benefits and what are the risks. And from a standpoint, it is said, and I don't have the exact mechanisms off the top of my head, that fat burns cleaner in the brain than
Mm-hmm.
sugar. It doesn't have as many byproducts in the brain as sugar. And we find that for folks who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, a lot of times Alzheimer's has been caused by an excess of sugar throughout their
Mm-hmm.
lives, an excess of insulin throughout their lives. And insulin degrading enzyme is the same as amyloid plaque degrading enzyme. So as your body is like using all this insulin to deal with all the sugar that's come in, we're spending less time cleaning up the brain of these plaques that build up and end up showing as tangles and all in Alzheimer's. So, there's a lot of everything has to be looked at as a double-edged sword. Uh, Here's the thing. If somebody comes to me and they say, oh, I've heard about this ketogenic diet, and, I've been on this whole foods plant-based diet with low fat and, lots of grains and beans and whole foods and no sugars, and I feel great and my weight is perfect. I say, then why change something?
Mm-hmm.
Like it ain't broke, don't fix it. You look at the long-lived countries where people are long-lived, they're eating a plant-based diet that's high in grains and legumes and things like that, and it works for them.
Mm-hmm.
But the argument that I hear from people who I totally respect and who are promoting a whole foods plant-based low-fat diet will be that, well, this is what everybody needs to do. And the reality is that based on genetics, based on prior history, based on the damage that's been done in the body, not
Mm-hmm.
everybody handles grains and legumes and, sweet fruits the same. And yeah, they're loaded with nutrition and they can cause a negative effect on someone, for example, like me, who has like 47 different genes that predispose me to diabetes. And that when
Mm.
I eat grains or legumes or sweet fruits, my blood sugar goes up, which means my insulin goes up, right? And insulin is a fat storage hormone that has a whole lot of other negative effects. So, and that coupled with, I also have a few genes that would predispose me to Alzheimer's if I wasn't careful. I don't want to take that chance. You see?
Mm-hmm.
So our diet, we come out of the womb with certain set of genetics. And if we are take that baby and put that baby in a pristine environment without the environmental assaults, without the EMF assaults, without the stress of just being in a life there's loaded with TV and crime and all this, and you feed them this pristine diet, who cares what their genes are? They're going to turn out great, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when they study some of these people, like the blue zones, they go to these places, these people are normally in their native environments where community is huge. They have this sense of community and love and support that the average person living in the city in the US doesn't have, just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have. It's not part of that. So we have to look at all the things that work against us, and we have to look at all the things that work for us. And when cautioning a person or counseling a person, as a practitioner, I have an obligation to really look at that person as an individual and help them to come up with the best plan for them. And I can't honestly look at somebody who I measure and I do glucose testing, postprandial, and insulin testing, and their numbers are off or their hemoglobin A1C is high, indicating a high average glucose. I look and go, I would not be doing this person a service to tell them to go on a starch based diet that's high in sweet fruit. I wouldn't.
Right. Right. And there's so many different ways to do a whole foods diet. right? And we just think, oh, Whole Foods diet, I can eat anything I want as long, or Whole Foods plant-based, anything I want as long as it's not an animal. Well, that could be 6 cups of brown rice a day. That could, or that could be giant green salads, low starch. So there's ways to adjust a plant-based diet for someone's needs. And I've heard of people doing a plant-based ketogenic diet. You got to be very diligent, but you can do it in a way so you're burning fat for fuel and supplying your body with a plethora of nutrients from plants, while really being responsible and looking at the healthy carbs. So we're looking at choosing carbohydrates that serve us. So, like you said, genetically, some people can eat starches and eat, yams and sweet potatoes and potatoes and lots of legumes and beans, and their insulin doesn't go up beyond the normal. Their blood sugar doesn't rise beyond the normal. They're loving their energy they have. They're great. I am right there with you, and I've been doing as much of a whole foods plant-based diet as I can, and I have to be really careful with my portions when it comes to rice and bread and potato, because I can feel it. I still have a glucometer, God, I have a little ketone monitor somewhere around here, but I notice that my body wants to have higher blood sugar, and I'm no longer diabetic, and my A1C is awesome. It's like 4.9 or 4.7 or something like that. Like,
Beautiful.
it's wonderful, but I can raise my blood sugar with food, just like anyone could go to McDonald's and give themselves higher blood sugar, still within normal ranges, and I don't feel good. So I notice, like, too much starches, my body says, hey, this is not for me. Whereas other people, maybe the Okinawans, can live off of, purple potatoes, but there's only so many starchy carbohydrates my body likes. And so finding that balance for each person is key. How do we dial that in? How does someone know if they need to focus on more greens and more of the variety of colorful vegetables, and limit or lower their starchy intake?
Yeah, so you mentioned a few things already, and I love where this discussion's going. And I call it the sweet spot. We want to find for
Right.
you the sweet spot. What is that diet, that combination of diet and exercise and sleep and stress management and all that that gets you in your sweet spot? And you've already found it with going from being diabetic to having an A1C at 4.9. Congratulations, right? You're doing it. And I think everybody can. You mentioned two tools, a glucometer and a ketone meter. Everybody has a scale or access to a scale. That's a great tool too. You mentioned earlier another tool, which is the bioimpedance device, that you can look good on the scale, but you can be a skinny fat person,
Mm.
right? There are a lot of people who their body fat percentage is high, but they're showing as looking thin, right? Because they have no muscle on them, right? So I've seen it. I've gotten on a scale. I've looked at a friend who weighed like 10 pounds less than me at the same height. And I'm thinking, let's do our body fat. We were having fun. This is what geeky people do when they get together. Let's try my bioimpedance device. And I'm like, I have less fat on my body than she does. And she weighs 10 pounds less than me. How can that be? So there are lots of measurement tools. The ones that we can do at home, obviously a scale, obviously a tape measure, that gives us some idea. But also using the glucometer. Everybody should have a glucometer, I believe. Everybody, just learn how to use it, figure it out. If everything's fine, you don't need to keep testing. But I want to find out, what do the meals that I eat on a regular basis do to my blood sugar?
Mm-hmm.
Does it keep it steady? Does it go way high? Does it go way low? And when I first started doing this myself, I discovered that some of my favorite foods like pineapple and mango and papaya were shooting my sugars into dangerous levels, like in the
Mm.
160s, which, as you know, if you were diabetic, you know that that's too high. And my A1C was 5.6. 5.6, which means my average glucose was around 119. And so if a normal fasting is in the 80s or 70s, and I was there for the time I was sleeping, maybe 10, 12 hours a night, between meals, then wow, it must have been going super high to average out to 119. And that's the way I look at A1C. So A1C, you can do it at home. It's a little more cumbersome. The tests are a little bit more expensive. You can test that at home. You can get a glucometer and you can get a ketone meter. And the ketone meters, I think the blood works way better than the urine, which is what most people use, the urine, but the blood works way better. And you just get some senses. You see what your food's doing, what your exposures are doing, what your stress levels are doing. And then you modify to keep yourself in an ideal range. And what I find when I teach this to people in a program I call the Sweet Spot Solution. I teach them how to measure it and when to measure it and how to change what they're doing based on what they see. And these folks are losing weight, they're getting rid of belly fat, their brains are clearing, their energy's going up, their cholesterol levels are improving, and everything overall is improving. If it's not, then you go back and go, wait, what do I have to do here? Do I have to shift my diet? Is it that I'm in stress mode all the time and my cortisol levels are through the roof? Is it that I'm not getting enough sleep? So it's not just about the diet, it's about the lifestyle. But taking charge and having little technologies that are easy to do at home makes all the difference in the world. You can get pH paper to test your pH. You can get urine strips to see what's going on in your urine. And I teach this to people to really take charge of their health.
What are healthy levels of glucose? So, back when I interviewed Dr. William Davis, the guy that wrote the book Wheat Belly, I just love his book came out right as I went gluten free, like 7 years ago or 8 years ago, and so it was kind of like the first. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. Doctors are talking about this. This is interesting because I thought I was totally on the fringe. And I lost 25 pounds of water weight in my first month being gluten free. That's how inflamed it was making me. My husband and I, we both lost so much water weight that our ring sizes went down. Mine went down 1.5 ring sizes, and my husband went down 2 ring sizes. We waited a few months to get our rings resized because I was worried it would bounce back. But it's been 8 years, hasn't bounced back. So it's, that's how much grains can be inflaming us, and it's systemic, and we're just, habituated to it. So we don't know that we don't feel good
Yeah,
because it's
you
how
don't
we've
know.
always felt, right?
Yeah.
And he says, so Dr. William Davis, who's a cardiologist that helps to reverse heart disease basically with monitoring your own blood sugar, even though you don't have diabetes. And I love what he said. He goes, every single person should own a glucometer. And don't forget that there's diabetes out there. Everyone should own a glucometer, and everyone should use it to test, just like you just said, to test their meals. And if everyone used that as their guide for their diet, and they made sure that their meals didn't have them spike into unhealthy blood sugar ranges, and then everyone would be able to dial in a diet that prevents heart disease and prevents Alzheimer's and other diseases that happen over a long term of excessive blood sugar. Because people think, well, I'm not diabetic, so I don't have a blood sugar problem.
Yeah. That's right. They do. And it's totally wrong. And it's a hidden problem. And I'm going to just share my own story from my own parents. They both died very young. My mom, 56, sudden heart attack, didn't know she had heart disease. My dad was 50, 62, 64, something like that. Same thing 2 years later. And they didn't have it. And when I looked genes, I've been studying genes a lot. I look at the gene tests and I looked and I said, we don't have a lot of cardiovascular genes. What we have is blood sugar imbalance genes. So I believe that because of their diets, because of the alcohol, because of the white flour, and because of all the things they were eating, they were stressing that system. They didn't get into being diabetic because usually it's a continuum. It could be 30 years of this, just heading in that direction before you even get diagnosed. And I think that they were creating these stiffening of their artery linings, the plaques, the hypertension that got them early on. I
Mm-hmm.
believe that because, when I look genetically, I'm not prone, there's a little bit of that, but I don't have like the ApoE44. I don't have a whole bunch of the other, angiotensin and other genes that would more predispose me. But we do have the cardiovascular. And when I recognized that, it scared me. I'm like, oh, wait, I could be leading myself down that way, even on a whole foods plant-based diet, if I'm eating too much flour. And now I don't believe flour is even part of a whole food plant-based diet because it's really
Mm-hmm.
not a whole foods, right?
Right.
Whole grain is, but rice flour isn't. Just my opinion. So going back to your original question as to what I think is a healthy range of glucose, I kind of like to see people in their 70s and low 80s as a fasting or lower than that if they're doing well on it. And I don't like to see it go up above 110 after a meal. I've done a lot of
Really?
research. I've looked at studies that show that once it goes above 120, a lot of the peripheral nerve damage that we see as a result of diabetes, a complication of diabetes, starts happening when the blood sugar goes up above 110. Beta cell damage in the pancreas starts happening at a little over 100. And then the retinopathies start to happen in the 120s to 140s. So if we're just, keeping a nice steady 85 or 90, which is considered normal, blood sugar, fasting blood sugar, but we're going up into the 170s and 80s and 60s up and down throughout the day, we're creating the damage there that can be leading us to the long-term complications.
That was my next question, was talking about that. What are the healthy levels of glucose, especially for someone who's never used a glucometer? People can go to Amazon and for like $30 get a glucometer with 100 test strips. So it's fairly easy to go get one. Um, and you can read the reviews and pick the one that looks like it works best for you. So what you're saying is that in your fasting, so you wake up first thing in the morning and you grab your glucometer. Maybe you go to the bathroom, drink a glass of water, grab your glucometer. Your hands are clean. You don't have like a hand cream on or anything. You've washed your hands. You take your levels and you want your levels to be somewhere in the 70s or low 80s. What if it is lower than 70? Is that okay?
That's fine too. And a lot of people who eat more towards a ketogenic, they're going into ketosis overnight and their blood sugar gets lower. My usual fasting these days is in the 60s to
Okay.
low 70s.
But if below 60, would someone be concerned?
No, I mean, when I do fasting periodically, therapeutic fasting. I've had my blood sugar go as low as 35. I've gone running when my blood sugar was in the 40s.
Wow.
If your body's balanced, it knows how to handle it. And if you're adapted to fat burning. So I didn't no. And I think that when it depends, like if somebody feels awful when their blood sugar goes below 60, they shouldn't be targeting that, but they also should be targeting to identifying what's metabolically out of balance so that they can figure it out. Maybe it's they're toxic and they need to work on their liver because the liver is involved with mobilizing the glycogen stores. Maybe it's that their nutrients are off and they don't have the nutrients to go and, keep that blood sugar steady. So that steady is variable from person to person. But I personally feel really good when my blood sugar is in the 40s or 50s. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
really good. Not just like, oh, I feel fine. I don't have food cravings. Like really good.
Mm-hmm. This is great to point out that if someone's feeling really bad and their blood sugar, fasting blood sugar in the morning is 60, there's other factors we need to look at. But if
Yeah.
you're feeling amazing, then keep doing what you're doing.
Just keep
So
doing it.
even anywhere between anywhere basically low 80s or lower is where you want to be. Now tell us what happens if someone wakes up, they take their blood sugar, and regardless of whether they're diabetic or not, so basically the 100% of the population, they take their blood sugar in the morning before they've eaten anything, and it's above, let's say it's above 80, so it's above 90, 90 or above. What is the damage? What's going on? Why is that a bad thing?
That's a good thing to ask because it means they're heading in the direction, right? So in medicine, when there's cutoffs on certain lab ranges, like above 100, you're considered insulin resistance. Above 120, you're considered diabetic. Does that mean that if you're 115, that you're not having a lot of the complications and the damage that's going on when you're diabetic? Is it like you just suddenly wake up, like with an infectious disease, you just suddenly wake up and you were exposed and now you're sniffling? It's very different than that. This is a chronic condition that develops over time. And so if a person's above 90, there's actually studies that show that there's a threefold increase in heart disease, heart attack, risk of heart attack when the sugar goes above 90. Right? And the higher it gets, the higher it is. So it's suddenly magically at 100, you're considered insulin resistant or pre-diabetic. But what about 98? What about 97? You know what I'm saying? It's like you progressively backwards. Where are you out of danger?
Yes. This is great. I think this is a home test that is, it's a $30 kit. Sometimes you can get like maybe a $50 kit, whatever one you try, but a $30 to $50 kit, some insurance companies will cover it if you ask your doctor, will give you an insight into what direction you're going with your health. This is why it's so important for everyone to use a glucometer. You don't have to use it every day, but decide that for the next 2 weeks, you're going to keep a food mood journal and write down everything you put in your mouth and test your blood sugar fasting. So when you wake up in the first thing in the morning, and then do you want people to test right before a meal and then an hour or 2 hours after a meal? How would you like people to test?
Oh, yeah, I have a very specific process for that. And at first we're testing very frequently. So right before a meal, and then I have them do for the first few days every 15 minutes. So what we want to capture is what I call the peak. I mean, it's not what I call a peak, it's the peak. It's where it goes to the highest it goes and then comes down again. So you want to at least be measuring so you see it goes up, it's up, it's up, it's up. Oh, now it's coming down, 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 down. Now you hit your peak. Some people will hit their peak at half an hour. Some people will hit their peak at 45, some an hour, some a little higher. And it also can depend on what you've eaten. So I actually help people do it that way. And if they're very consistently all the time at 45, I just say take it right before and take it at 45.
Got it. So just to clarify, what you're saying is that they take their blood sugar right before a meal, they eat their meal, and then they take their blood sugar every 15 minutes after that meal for the next 2 hours?
Yeah, and if the person tends to be one who says, "Oh, I get hypoglycemic between meals. I feel really spacey at about 3 hours," you keep going. You keep going until they eat their next meal.
Oh,
And it's a
yeah.
lot of pinpricks when, people first start, but it's so worth it. And here's the thing that I'm super excited about is these things called continuous glucose meters. And they're going to be more and more available. I think the technology is getting to the point where everybody can get one. Right now, they're prescription only in the US, but in Europe, anybody can walk into a drugstore, a pharmacy, and get a continuous glucose meter. You slap a little patch kind of thing on your arm, and you carry this little device, and you read it anytime, day or night. You don't have to prick your finger. You just test it, and it will keep track of the last 8 hours or so. So even if you forget to check it, it'll show you on a graph where you've been.
Is it like
I
a
think that's going to
Bluetooth
change
device?
health. What's that?
Is it like a Bluetooth device that's hooked up to you like a patch? Does it talk to
It's
your
not really
phone or?
Bluetooth. It's just it's like a little microchip that's in the thing. It only emits the currency out, the signal out when you hold that thing up to it. So I don't think it's not really a Bluetooth. It's some sort of a device. It's supposed to be very low EMF exposure and all that.
Do you find that they're accurate?
Yeah, I compare it to my glucometer, and yeah, they're accurate.
So cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, that's really interesting. So when someone now, some people will wake up in the middle of the night. I always tell people if you wake up in the middle of the night, test your blood sugar then, because
Yeah.
sometimes it can be a problem with blood sugar that's woken them up in the night, and they think, oh, I just woke up to pee. I'm like, you know what? People with an imbalance of blood sugar, that's one of the signs is how many times you wake up in the night.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell them to check it, and it could be high and it could be low. So this is interesting. What I found as I started to monitor people in testing is that, people think, oh, I get cranky and irritable and I feel dizzy and I have to eat. And what they expect is that that's a period of very low blood sugar. And what I found is more often than not, it's actually when their blood sugar is super high. But because they have insulin resistance, that sugar is in the blood. It's not doing them any good. It's not getting into their cells or into their brain. And very interesting. The first time they notice that, they go, oh my God, I cannot believe I thought my blood sugar would have been like a 50 in between meals, and now I'm finding it's 180. One person found it went up to 200. She
Mm.
was eating really well. She was doing her salads. Everything was staying normal. And then she felt like at one point between meals, she felt like, wow, I feel like I'm going to faint. This is that old feeling I used to get. I wonder what my blood sugar is. And she tested it, it was 200. Turned out all she'd done, this is how sensitive she was. She had the same salad she normally did, but she put a handful of raisins on it. And it shot her sugar up to 200. And then she felt wacky and spacey, and because all that sugar sitting in the blood and not getting into the cells.
Let's talk about insulin resistance. This is a really interesting topic. The idea that people feel like they're starving because their cells are starving. The blood sugar's on the nutrition, the blood sugar is on the outside of the cell and it can't get in. What causes insulin resistance? Now, what I've heard is that it's a one possible reason is it's a nutrient deficiency. There's trace minerals like chromium and vanadium that are needed to make insulin work with the cell. Is that the cause of insulin resistance, or is it a cumulative effect of other things?
Good question. And yeah, there are usually nutrient deficiencies. But when I'm looking for cause, I'm always looking for root cause. I'm always out looking to say, oh, okay, so their problem is low levels of these micronutrients, which, by the way, like chromium, for example, that's its only job in the body. Nobody even knows what else it might do, is to escort glucose into the cells. And so why is the chromium low? Well, is it that they're eating a low chromium diet? Or is it that they're not absorbing chromium? Or is it that they're using up all the chromium because they're constantly in a state of high glucose, which is causing them to have to constantly be trying to move across? So I would venture to say that the majority of time it's because they've been living in a state of hyperinsulin for so long and high blood sugar for so long that that poor chromium has been used up. It's basically been strip mined. It's stored in the liver. If we have more than we take in a supplement, we have more than we need. It gets stored in the liver for use on a rainy day. But I find that you have to dig deeper. What I feel is the true root cause. I'll talk about two different causes. One, the cells on the outside, the receptors on the cells that are supposed to be picking up the insulin and the glucose and taking them into the cell and using them to make energy, they get damaged. Well, why do they get damaged? Well, they can get damaged for a number of reasons. They can get damaged by exposure to chemicals or inflammatory chemicals or to toxins or any number of things, oxidized fats, which we hit on earlier, any number of those things, right? Number two, they could be damaged by high levels of insulin over a long period of time. They're just going enough. It's kind of like when you expose a cell to too much of something, it creates defenses. And we hear insulin resistance. There's also progesterone resistance. There's leptin resistance. We're even finding estrogen resistance, thyroid hormone resistance. So many of these different resistances that come up. And going back to what you said earlier about high levels of like a ketogenic diet possibly affecting thyroid function, it's possible that it's affecting the receptors if somebody's eating high levels of just oils and oxidized fats and things like that. But that's, yet another possible cause. So we have to look at why. And usually it's because somebody's been on standard American diet and lifestyle, eating lots of sugar and processed grain, and it's causing the cells to the pancreas to produce a lot of insulin to try to get this sugar into the cells, and over time just gets worn out. The mechanism gets worn out, the nutrients are depleted, etc. There are other things that can cause it. People who are fit cells will pick up glucose much better than non-fit cells. So trained muscle, you can avoid some of the pitfalls. People who are training and really working their muscles may be able to get away with a little more sugar in their diet than the average person. Lack of sleep. Studies have shown that there's probably it's inflammatory mediators and things that don't get cleaned up during a good night's sleep that affect the cells and increase insulin resistance. And they found that even a healthy person can have a temporary insulin resistance the day after a bad night's sleep. Now, in the person who doesn't have that as an ongoing situation, By the next day, they're fine again. But it's just a little tip. If you don't sleep well, you shouldn't be eating foods that require a lot of insulin the next day, or you're contributing to the problem. So there's any number of reasons that this happens. For the most part, I think it's our standard American diet and lifestyle full of processed foods, lots of oxidized fats, and chemicals in the environment, and lots of stress and lack of sleep.
I like that you pointed out that those who, if you've had a bad night's sleep, just make sure the next 24 hours you're eating a low carbohydrate diet. Focus on the vegetables that are non-starchy and get some nuts and seeds and maybe some healthy fats like some deep ocean fish, but really avoid the starches, avoid the processed carbohydrates, the pastas and the breads and the pizzas and all that, and any kind of form of sugar, the donuts, because your body is less able to handle more sugar even after the stress of one night of bad sleep.
That's right.
Amazing. It's funny, I think about the 15 to 25 pounds that students gain when the first year in college.
Oh God.
It's like, that you just described why. I mean, the lack of sleep, the pulling the all-nighters, and then the eating the party food, right? And the beer and the whatever, eating all the high carbohydrate, whatever the students eat, right? The pizza and all that. But the pulling the all-nighters, feeling invincible as a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old, or we feel totally invincible, pull an all-nighter and don't realize that our body is unable to effectively handle carbohydrates after just that level of stress. And then there's other levels of stress you pointed out, like if we're having a stressful time at our job or in our relationship or with our kids, stress absolutely does affect how our body can handle sugar, regardless of whether someone's diabetic or not. So even a healthy person sees a shift. And most people who are listening probably have some health concerns they're looking to clear up. So this is a really good thing to point out, is that any level of emotional, mental, or physical stress plays a role in causing blood sugar problems. Wow. So ideally, you're saying that, I just wanted to clarify this, ideally after a meal, and that when you say after, basically you're finding the peak. So the peak of the blood sugar, which for some people you're saying could be 45 minutes, other people could be 2 hours, but whatever that peak is after a meal, you don't want it to be higher than 110.
That's what I shoot for. Now, if you've got somebody who's starting out diabetic, right, as they're making this shift, we have to look at it differently because they may not ever get below 110 or 120 or 150. So I look at, with people who are already diagnosed with diabetes and their sugars are higher to begin with, I look at, don't eat meals that raise your blood sugar more than 25 to 30 points.
Ah, that's a good way of putting it. So whatever they were before the meal, you really don't want to go over 25 points at the peak after the meal.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good way of putting it. There's an idea, and that's being promoted in the plant-based world, the plant-based whole food world, that we should eat low fat naturally because fats are what's causing blood sugar problems, because fat is clogging the cell and making insulin not work correctly. Can you either talk about this or dispel a myth, or like, why is it that some people can go on a fruitarian diet and no longer have diabetes and insulin resistance, and other people go on a ketogenic diet and no longer have insulin resistance and diabetes, and they're two totally opposite diets?
I know, totally opposite, right? Biochemical individuality. And here's the thing, people who say that fat clogs insulin receptors quote studies that don't really support that. When I've looked at the studies, they don't actually support that. They show that excess fat in the bloodstream, free fatty acids in the bloodstream, can create a problem, but that's excess, right? Excess free fatty acids in the bloodstream generally result from eating too many calories. Triglycerides, right? Triglycerides come from eating too many carbs. So whatever calories you might be eating too much of, that's one way to look at it. But, why is it that some people switch to this, very high fruit diet and they no longer have diabetes? I've seen it. So it's very individual, right? But I don't know what they were eating before. Did they switch from the Twinkie diet to a fruitarian diet? Could they have done it, it would most any diet have shifted them, right? If it was
Mm.
rich in whole plant food. So I think we have to look at each individual case, and there are, of course, genetic variations. But I haven't seen evidence that supports for me that the insulin receptors get clogged from fats. Yes, from oxidized fats, from hydrogenated fats, from fats that have been damaged and are not whole food plant-based fats. Oils, probably, yeah. But avocados, I don't see any studies that show the dangers of avocados. I don't see studies that show that people who eat too many olives have a problem. I don't see it.
And what about the theory that the French eat a super like they're like, well, the French, the French don't have, as near the incidences of heart disease as we do in America, and they're eating, bread, croissants, and butter and eggs, and lots of fat. And so, why is it that the French have a lower rate of heart disease than
Yeah,
Americans?
as a group, we're not because there's always the individuals within the group. But when you look at statistics that lump a whole group together, you're not getting the individual information. So, why I could guess that there's other factors. They take siestas in the middle of the day. They rest more. They have better relationships. The lifestyle may not be as go 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 go. I mean, there's other factors. So food isn't everything. It's food with lifestyle, with stress factors, with community, with the environment. There's so much more. So I don't think we can come up with any one answer that works for everybody. And that's why I'm a big fan of helping each person to figure out what works best for them. I've tried the fruitarian thing. I tried it for 3 whole days. I couldn't stop thinking about food. I couldn't stop craving food. I couldn't stop thinking about where my next mango was going to come from. And I felt out of whack. I know people who do well with that. I tend to do better. I've tried a real high fat diet. I've tried, eating a lot of, oils and things like that just to see. It didn't work for me. I've tried doing a high carb. I tried macrobiotics. Didn't work for me. But what works for me is the majority of my diet is vegetables. And then the calories to make up for what did we say was deficient in vegetables was calories, right? To make up the calories are whole food plant-based fats like avocado, olives. Now, I'm not sitting around eating fat all day. I'm eating huge plates of vegetables with a handful of walnuts and hemp seeds to get my omega-3s, with maybe some sliced avocado in there, maybe a handful of olives, right? That's the way I'm proposing eating. And that for me works really well. And I propose that everybody figure it out. And you need some help usually to figure it out.
A large group of women have discovered that the ketogenic diet was the cure for their hormone imbalances, sex hormone imbalances. Can we talk about I mean, you've touched on the benefits of preventing major diseases down the road. But what about the women who are estrogen imbalanced or are progesterone imbalanced, have hot flashes, or have skipped missed periods, or have polycystic ovarian syndrome? That's something that I had, that eating more healthy fats helped me, in addition to so many other lifestyle changes, helped me to resolve. So what about the healthy version of the ketogenic diet helps to balance women's hormones?
Well, all the steroid hormones come from fat. Actually, all the steroid hormones come from cholesterol. So we're much maligning that. That doesn't mean that I believe that people have to eat cholesterol, although some people do. I haven't eaten cholesterol in 35 years, and I have, plenty of healthy levels of it because the body makes it. But we make our hormones from fat, and if we are too deficient in fat, we don't have the building blocks to make those hormones. So I think that's part of it. Depending on how they're doing it, if they're doing what I propose, which would be more of a whole food plant-based version of a ketogenic diet. And we're not saying, you have to eat like 80% of your calories from fat, by the way. That's like making these just broad generalizations of macronutrient ratios, I think is wrong as well. I don't think I eat 80% of my calories as fat. I eat a ton of carbohydrate in the form of low water content, high nutrient dense vegetables. So I've measured and I've seen that I can eat 150 grams of carbohydrate if it's in this form, right? If I add
Mm.
potatoes or carrots, cooked carrots or something like that to it, it may skew it. But if it's lettuce and broccoli and Brussels sprouts and cabbage and cauliflower and all these other high nutrient dense things, they do have some carbohydrate. And so we have to just look at like what is this really for the individual person. So why on the sex hormones, I like to know what the person where they were at before. Were they on a standard American diet which had a lot of processed fats and garbage in there, and they switched to a higher fat whole foods diet? It just depends on the person and where it's coming from. I have to see the studies, but my guess is that it provides the building blocks for building the hormones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing organic, you're taking away the estrogen mimickers in the environment.
Got it. So, as you've been describing, you've kind of been touching on what kinds of people would benefit from your version of the ketogenic diet, which is incredibly balanced and healthy. I don't even want to call it ketogenic because everyone associates that with
Bacon and butter.
no vegetables and butter and bacon, right? So you're talking about a healthy fat, lots of vegetable diet, and low in starches, and really very responsible carbohydrates. It's like the responsible carbohydrate and fat diet.
There you go.
And as we've been listening, I'm sure listeners have thought, man, that sounds like I should try it. This sounds like something that I could benefit from. Can you just touch on the description of the people that would really benefit the most from trying this?
Yeah. I would say people who have been, eating moderately healthy diet or even eating a very healthy whole food plant-based diet that's grounded in a lot of starches, whole grains and things like that, and they're plateaued. They're like, I'm stuck. I've got an extra 30 pounds on my body and I don't understand it. So the quote unquote hefty vegetarian that may need to shift it a little bit. I'm not saying that they need to go away from being vegetarian. You can still be vegetarian. So the way I propose this is that not everybody has to be vegetarian or vegan to do this diet, but it can be 100%, and I do it as 100%. And in some people, having a little bit of organic, free range, whatever, or deep ocean fish or something is going to work. But I think it's those kind of people who are just plateaued. They've tried a regular ketogenic diet and they end up with, like you said, kidney and liver issues that they don't feel right or they get more inflamed. People who just are on the standard American diet and want a healthier way to eat, it's a good way to go. People with inflammatory joint diseases, bowel diseases, etc., because things get better when you take out the irritants and the aggravants. So I think the people it's not for, I wouldn't do it while you're pregnant or nursing, right? If you're on insulin, I would do it only under the supervision of a doctor because your insulin needs are most likely going to go way down. I've seen it. I've seen people go way down. People who are on blood pressure medication need to be carefully monitoring their blood pressure because the blood pressure normalizes and goes down. So there's times that people shouldn't, but I think most people give it a try.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, let's get into what it looks like. Can you paint a picture of what a day looks like for you on this diet and what you recommend people do, like breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks?
Sure. And it's going to be different from each person. I personally like intermittent fasting. So I usually don't eat my first meal until after what most people would consider lunchtime. So noon is probably the earliest I usually would eat. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 4. So I will do that. But I start my day with a big green smoothie. And my green smoothie is loaded with greens. It's about a quart. And it's got some kind of whole food plant-based fat in it. Usually avocado because my husband makes them a lot and that's what he likes to put in. But I've done them with hemp seeds, with walnuts, with a combination, with some coconut meat, coconut yogurt, which I absolutely love. And usually I'll have that smoothie with some sort of fermented food, coconut yogurt, etc. I do have a little book called Hormone Hacking Breakfast Menus. I'm happy to share with your readers or listeners because it gives you an idea of what that first meal of the day should consist of, the components. Very different than the bacon and eggs or toast and cereal kind of breakfast that people are used to. So I start that way. I usually space my meals minimally 4 hours apart, 4 to 6 hours. So generally on most days I eat 2 meals. Some days I will eat three. It depends if I'm traveling. I'll tend to get off of this a little bit. But what do I eat? We're doing this on the challenge. So I'm giving recipes and menu plans and all this on my 4-day keto challenge. So you'll get here's some breakfast ideas, here's some lunch ideas. So lunch can be a wrap, right? You can do a coconut wrap instead of the bread or wheat type of a burrito type thing, or a nori wrap. You can do a sandwich, and you can get, actually there's some really nice breads and crackers that make nice sandwiches, and the breads and crackers are made with nuts and seeds and food, like real vegetable food. You can do a jicama slice becomes a piece of bread. And I've made sandwiches where I slather like a good guacamole or some sort of hummus. I like to make zucchini or broccoli hummus instead of using the beans, and put that on with lots of sprouts and other things. So I make these sandwiches, wraps that are more lunch foods, or a salad, with handful of olives and avocado or some nuts and seeds on there. Hemp seeds I use a lot of because they're really rich in protein and omega-3, good source. You can do soup. It can be a warm soup in the winter, like, a bunch of vegetables cooked in a pot with lots of great herbs and stuff. And to the extent, for me, I don't do the beans, but once people have gotten into this ketosis state and a fat burning state and train their body, they can usually start to increase some of those things and maybe add in some lentils or some brown rice or something like that, but always using their glucose meter to check their glucose and ketone meter. And dinner can be a stir fry, lunch can be a stir fry. I love stuffed peppers as one of my things. I take a bell pepper, red or orange or yellow, and I stuff it with guacamole or some sort of sour cream that's made from nuts and seeds. I eat coconut yogurt. I make all kinds of yogurts, lots of sauerkraut. I use a lot of that. Some people can't because they have some gut issues that need to be addressed first, or histamine issues, but I use a lot of kimchi and yogurts and kefirs and things like that for probiotic food. So it's getting this wide range of food and a lot of different nutrients, and also feeding your microbiome with some good fermented foods.
Love it. Love it. Um, I will grow in the summertime these zucchinis that go so big.
Mm,
There's their diameters, they're several inches in diameter, and when I get the sweet spot where they're like the size of a bagel, and then I cut them into slices like sliced bread, like giant crackers,
love it.
and then yeah, and then we will make sandwiches with them. Yeah, so if you can ever get a hold of really big zucchinis, you can cut them up, make them, use them like crackers. Right now in the store, in our store, in our area, the zucchinis are like the size of carrots. They're really
Oh yeah,
pathetic.
they're little bitty things
They're
at
little
this
tiny,
time of year.
right?
But yeah, to the homegrown ones that you get that way. That reminded me though that people like noodles. People like breads and crackers and noodles. And how do I do that on a low carb fare? Well, with the noodles, you can use the zucchini, which I thought you were going there, but these skinny zucchinis make really good noodles. And they're having them in the stores now. I've been making noodles out of zucchinis and other kind of veggies for decades, and now we're seeing them in the store like it's something new, right? But anyway, you can get them that way, or you can get a little spiralizer machine. But the other thing that you can do, there's other kinds of noodles. There's konjac noodles and there's kelp noodles. Yeah.
Yeah, and my favorite spiralizer, because I've gone through a bunch of them. My wrist will hurt because I'll just be like
Yeah.
cranking the handheld one, um, and trying to make a giant batch of zoodles, zucchini noodles. And I found that there's an electric one. It's called the Veggie Bullet.
I
It's
have that. I love.
yes. Oh man, I thought it was so gimmicky, but I kept watching all the videos and I'm like, I have to get this thing. It's so cool. It's loud. The thing is loud, but you can make zoodles, so zucchini noodles. You can make the carrot noodles, the beet noodles. Gosh, what else? Oh, a broccoli. Take broccoli stems and you need to shave off the skin, the fibrous part, but then you can make noodles out of that. Yeah, no, I really, really like that machine for making the noodles. Do you have any, you must have recipes that come with this program, or do you have a book that you sell to help us dial in these wonderful
Yeah.
meals?
Yeah, so when you join the Healthy Keto Challenge, I'm pulling together recipes that I've already been published, but in different programs. But there'll be at least 5 recipes for breakfast, 5 recipes for lunch, 5 recipes for dinner, 5 recipes for dessert, and then I'm going to throw in some, cracker bread type things as well. And then my sweet spot program, which is where we balance blood sugar and go through all of this, we have a 250-page low glycemic recipe guide, like that. And if you go to my website, drritamarie.com, and click on books, you'll see some other books and stuff. I have a quick lunch and dinner ideas book where I teach like pestos and various kind of nut and seed pates and dips and stuff, which are awesome, really quick ways to make those. So I do have stuff available.
Wonderful. I did have a question I didn't get to. I'm curious. I've heard some people say that high insulin causes damage, and I've heard other people say that high sugar over time causes damage. And so
Both do,
this is, of course, in the bloodstream. So both cause damage in the
both
bloodstream
cause
when you have a
damage.
sustained high
Absolutely.
blood sugar, and then also then
Yep.
the high insulin trying to force the sugar into the cell when things are not working. Can
Yep.
you touch on um, which one does what? What does high blood sugar over time do to the body? Just so
Yeah.
we get a I think we're motivated when we really get when we wrap because high blood pressure, for example, is a silent killer because it's like you don't feel pain. You just walk around with
Right.
high blood pressure and then you drop dead, right?
Yeah.
So
Same
now
thing
we're
with
seeing
high
that.
insulin.
Sorry.
Same thing with high insulin.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got high insulin or high blood sugar, both, right? We're walking
Right.
around with these silent killers. We don't really feel the pain, although there are symptoms like we can definitely be irritable and cranky when we have blood sugar problems. But we're not experiencing the immediate effects, so we're not really motivated because there's not immediate pain. So if you can kind of lay out so we get that every time we go to eat these meals that are causing our blood sugar to spike, we will remember your words and how much the future damage is taking place. So on a microscopic level, what damage is happening when we have high insulin and high blood sugar?
Sure. I'll start with the sugar because the high sugar causes a process called glycosylation. It's a glucose coating, like sugar coating of various cells. And when you think about hemoglobin A1C is glycosylated hemoglobin, it's basically your red blood cells are coated with this sugar. They become stiffer and more brittle. Think about if you ever made taffy when you were a kid, right? You heat this molasses and sugar, and then when it cools down, it's got these spiky. You can, make it like have fun with it as a kid. Well, that's what happens, and when our blood cells get glycosylated as the hemoglobin A1C goes up, your case 4.9% of your blood cells are glycosylated. In somebody who has, an uncontrolled diabetic, 11%. And that difference between 4.9 and 11 is huge in terms of the kind of damage it can do to blood vessel linings, and to microvasculature. So people who have high levels of sugar over time, they're damaging the blood vessels and the nerve supply in the peripheral nerves. So in the feet, in the fingers, and they start to not feel it. And that's why a lot of folks end up with with amputations. It also damages the microtubules and stuff in the kidneys, very small, and it's constantly going in there. And that's another one of the most common causes of kidney disease is uncontrolled high blood sugar. It does the same thing in the retinas, in the eyes. So if that's not enough to make you feel like I want my hemoglobin A1C down to 4.9, just like you, then, I don't know what would be, but it's constant damage. Now, insulin is a little bit different. The high levels of insulin actually stiffen the blood vessels, which causes hypertension, which you just got finished saying was one of those silent killers. So the stiffening of those arterial walls means that they're not going to be as flexible, right? So if you are just standing at your desk, there's a certain level of elasticity in your vessels that makes the right blood flow. But now I decide to run down the street because there's a tiger chasing me. I want my blood vessels to be able to expand to account for the increased blood supply that comes when my heart starts beating to help me get the blood to my extremities so I can get away from the tiger. And if you're in a state where there's been a lot of insulin and damage to those vessels, they're much stiffer and they don't respond the same way. So you can end up, that can actually cause a sudden heart attack or stroke when we're pushing that pressure. It can cause hypertension, which over the long haul causes heart disease, heart attacks and stroke. There's other things that the insulin does as well. Insulin is a fat storage hormone, not a fat burning hormone. So when insulin's in the system, we're just constantly storing fat. And if that's the case, we're going to be storing our glucose as fat. We're going to turn our glucose into triglycerides, which then get stored as fat because there's too much of it and the body's trying to bring it down. It causes rapid increase and then it could cause rapid decrease in the blood sugar, which can cause people to faint or pass out or feel that woozy, ooky feeling that happens. So that's just the beginnings of it. It's very damaging. Brain. Okay, insulin. Let me just talk about high levels of insulin in your brain. Insulin degrading enzyme. The body goes, oh, when I'm done with that rapid surge of insulin, I need to break it down and get the levels back down to normal. There's an enzyme called insulin degrading enzyme, and it's the same enzyme that's used in the brain to break down those clots, those amyloid plaques that happen that end up causing Alzheimer's. So there's all sorts of stuff like that and not allowing the brain to function properly.
So when you have high insulin in the brain, is it contributing to increasing the plaques because the high insulin, in order to get rid of high insulin, it disrupts the ability to also get rid of plaque?
That's one way, yeah. And also, insulin resistance happens in the brain. We used to not think that when I was in school. We were taught that the brain doesn't require insulin to get the sugar into the cells. And indeed, we found that it does. And you can get insulin resistance in the brain as well.
And that makes so much sense for someone with insulin resistance to get into ketosis, either through fasting or through a diet that gets them into that state of burning fat for fuel, because the brain works so well at using ketones as brain fuel. If someone is in ketosis over time, does insulin resistance go away? Is it something that like resets itself?
And yeah, I mean, I see it. I see it where I've had people who start out with their level of fasting insulin, which should be in the 3 to 5 range, by the way, in the 10 to 20 range. And over time, it's coming down and down and down, which means that they're producing less of the insulin, which means that the cells are exposed to less of it. And so the resistance goes down as well.
If someone has had grandparents or parents that had Alzheimer's, do you think genetically they're more predisposed to having it, or do you think that this is that it is it's more that they learned how to eat from their family, that those habits that create the
Yeah.
disease?
That's a great question. And I think it's both. I think that, there are definitely genes that we've found that do predispose someone so they don't have to be quite as bad as their neighbor in order to get Alzheimer's. Whereas their neighbor, if they don't have that gene, has to be really bad to get it, that kind of thing. So there's that degree. I definitely think it's a combination of both.
And I like that you brought up that someone, no matter what their genes are, they could be predisposed to having every illness. If you brought them into the Garden of Eden and there was no stress and, God provided them with all the nutrients that they needed, and it's like in that utopian state, the body wouldn't create those disease states, because uh, it is the lack of nutrients and the amount of stress that loads the gun, sort of speak. So, um, it's a motivator for some of us who look at our family history and go, "Wow, I've got cancer and heart disease and Alzheimer's in my the last two generations of my family. If I don't make sure that my blood sugar and my insulin are under control, my genes are all set up to create these diseases in myself. If I don't really take charge and manage my diet and lifestyle now."
Absolutely. That's what motivated me when I was in my mid to late 20s. I was looking around and going, we don't have old people in our family. And the ones that are getting close to that, what we'd consider old, what I don't consider old these days, but is those are people who are not real well, right? They have diabetes or they have had heart attacks. So I looked at it and said, well, I have to be super careful because I don't have genes protecting me. You look at the George Burns, right? His habits were worse than my mom's, the smoking, the drinking, the blah, blah, blah. And yet he outlived my mom. My mom made it to 56. He made it to 100.
Sometimes we're blessed with great genes and we can do whatever we want. But if you look at your family history and there's a bunch of diseases and people aren't living very long, then we need to get a bit more
Yeah,
responsible with our diet. Your diet
absolutely.
sounds very reasonable. You're saying eat lots of vegetables and get healthy plant-based fats, and
Yep.
occasionally, on an individual basis, you might also use oils like MCT oil temporarily to help someone nudge them in the right direction, but that you're really using it responsibly. Now, can you let us know a bit about how people can work with you? So there's the free awesome event that's coming up. We're going to make sure that the links to get into your keto challenge is in the show notes of today's podcast at learnturehealth.com. If someone goes, I want to work with Ritamarie, do you work with people on a one-on-one basis, or do you have more programs? Can you
Yep.
walk us through what it looks like to work with you?
Absolutely. I have programs, and me personally, I work with people one on one in that who are in my year-long coaching program, our inner circle program. I do have coaches that I've trained. I have certified blood sugar balancing coaches, certified digestive mastery coaches, certified nutritional endocrinology coaches, and they work with individuals. So if you go to our site and you look at, it's drritamarie.com, and if you look out there, you'll see a spot where you can find out more about the different ways we work with people. And you can, sign up for, a consultation to see if we have something that's worth it for you. We work on a lot of different levels, but really seriously, our big thing is root cause. And if you just
Mm-hmm.
want a Band-Aid approach, whether you want an herb or a drug to cover up and you don't really want to make diet and lifestyle habit changes, then we're not the people to work with, because that's what we do. Yeah, we use herbs, we use supplements, we use lab testings, we get really deep in, we test genetics, but we're doing it from the standpoint of this isn't going to be a passive experience. It's going to be an active experience where you're taking charge of your own health. So if you go to my site, it says programs, one of the drop down menus, and you can click that and it will take you to the group programs that we have. And then under services, it'll tell you about the different programs that we have for working with a coach or me one-on-one.
Now, how long can we be on this? How long can we eat this way? I've heard some experts say that ketogenic should be a therapy that we use. We do it for a month and then, or we do it on and off, like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, or something like that. Are you saying that because this is so full of all the nutrients from a variety of vegetables, that it's more sustainable to be in ketosis in this way? Or do you think people should have an end date in mind?
I think they don't necessarily have to have an end date in mind, but keep in mind that nobody's really tested this as a long-term strategy. It was developed as a strategy to help kids with epilepsy. And it wasn't intended for healthy people to do it long term. That said, with the way we're doing it, it could potentially be, or it could be some long term. It could be something where, like, there's a concept these days called fasting mimicking diet, or a process where, once a month you do a cleanse for 3 or 4 days, that you just build it into your regime. You do it, you get the results, and then maybe once a month for a week you're going back into a ketogenic lifestyle, or maybe once a month, 1 month out of every three. Or I don't know, try, quite honestly, because I don't think it's been tested long term. I do know that you want to be measuring, you want to be looking at blood work, you want to be making sure that it's not throwing you into an unhealthy state, that you're continuing to feel good. There are people who will look at what I'm doing and say, well, I can't eat all those vegetables because I have oxalate sensitivities or sulfur sensitivities or whatnot. So that's where it needs to be addressed on a case by case basis. But the truth of the matter is, we need all these foods. And if our body's not tolerating them, it means that, not that the food is bad, but that the body needs to be addressed so that it can learn to take these foods. It's an imbalance that causes us to be oxalate sensitive or sulfur sensitive or can't tolerate greens.
So we're looking again, coming back to that idea that that snapshot in time of where I am right now. I need to focus on using the food as medicine and adjusting the diet to help me come back into balance so I'm strong and healthy, and then develop a long-term eating plan while always looking at and monitoring how I'm doing. Because
Exactly.
what was healthy for us when we were 20 may not be working for our body now. So we've got to always be focusing on listening to the body, and also doing these external tests and working with someone who's trained to make sure that nothing's in our blind spot. That's why I love the work that you do. Now, you also have a program where you teach. We talked a little bit about this before. I just want to touch on it. You have a program where you teach people, so professionals, how to read genetics and get more into, like, it's basically, you teach like a functional medicine program. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yep. Yeah, we have the Institute of Nutritional Endocrinology. We have a couple of shorter programs. One is in insulin resistance. So you become a certified insulin resistance coach and you get all the nuances of how to work with people on insulin resistance. We have one on digestion. And then we have a full certification program on nutritional endocrinology, where we have sections on functional assessment mastery and functional nutrition mastery, where you really get to learn all the nutrients, macro, micro, where they come from, where in the body they're absorbed, and how that affects a person. And we look at the body systems and the hormone mastery, and we look at the psychological issues and the lifestyle pieces, and we look at all of that, and we take people through a very, very comprehensive, kind of like a master's degree health coaching program. And we get doctors and nurses and health coaches, nutritionists, acupuncturists, chiropractors, and a whole bunch of other different people who are really wanting to go deep and understand what's going on in the body.
I think that's so cool. You're definitely on my list of things I want to do. That's on my list of things I want to do. I just geek out about this stuff. So that's definitely in my future. I'll make sure the link to that program for those health professionals that are listening, I'll make sure the link is in the show notes so that they can go check that out. Awesome. This is one of those topics that I'm just so passionate about, because I remember what diabetes felt like. And now, not being diabetic, but still seeing that my body, how my body reacts to eating foods. And I very rarely eat gluten-free bread, for example, because I feel fine, have a few slices. But if we get into this like gorging where we're having, 2 slices for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I can see my numbers trending in the wrong direction. And these are the processed foods that that aren't super healing for the body, right? And so, and I can see that I can overdo rice, and even doing all of the legumes and things like that. I can see my body trending in the wrong direction because I love playing with the glucose monitor, and just noticing that your way of focusing on all the nutrient dense foods is very healing and therapeutic, especially for me. My one last question would be around protein. I know we can get protein from all of these wonderful foods, that we don't need to necessarily eat meat. But what about when we get into ketosis? Some people have a tendency, if they're not balancing it and not monitoring it, they have a tendency to burn muscle. How do we prevent muscle loss? And how do we make sure we are getting enough protein when eating this way?
Yeah, so you could basically do run your numbers through a program. There's several of them, Chronometer and Fit Day and a whole bunch of others. You run your numbers through and you see how much protein am I getting. Calculate what you need. We actually need less than we think, but if you're as an athlete, you may need 80% of your lean body mass in grams of protein. If you're just a, 60-year-old female who's not athletic, you may need much less. You may need only 50 to 60 grams of protein a day. So we just calculate that, and those are overestimated. And you watch. And if it looks like you're getting plenty, but not absorbing, you want to look at digestion. And are you absorbing it? Are you producing enough enzymes and stomach acid to be able to do that? If it looks like you're not getting enough, and you look at the foods that you are getting that provide it, or foods that you're not getting that maybe you add that you provided, and you shoot for those ranges. And in cases where people are trying to do a therapeutic regime or trying to lose weight and they're not eating enough calories to maintain their weight because they're trying to lose, then sometimes adding protein powders or amino acids, branched chain amino acids, really can help with preventing muscle loss.
Do you sell any protein powders that are, I guess, keto friendly? Or would you say focus on like pumpkin seed powder because it's, or hemp seed powder, because it's higher in the healthy fats?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that, we don't sell any kind of proteins. We don't sell supplements at all, but we, I look at like Sacha Inchi, love Sacha Inchi, high level of protein. It does have some of those fats. I love hemp. I love the pumpkin, but also, some people do really well on the pea protein. Others don't. Cranberry protein, others don't. So there's a number of them out there. There are some bars that you can get to supplant that, especially if you're traveling and you're not getting your full meals. We do a bar. That's the one food we do, is the Unstoppable bar. And then there's Julian Bakery. That's the only other bar other than my own that I feel is keto friendly or low glycemic friendly for people who are on our Sweet Spot program because of the ratio between carbs and protein. And and some people it's just getting a specific amino acid supplement because for whatever reason, their digestion is impaired or they're not eating enough. And we add that to it. Or just up the foods, just which foods can they eat more of? Like you said, hemp seeds and Sacha Inchi seeds and, pumpkin seeds, not quite as high as those other two, but for sure, there's some good protein powders out there and some good supplementary food mixes that you can get to help that.
I think you sent me two of your bars.
Oh, did I? Oh, good.
You have two bars, right?
No, I just have the one, but I might have
Then
sent you two.
you might have sent me two of them. I I am remembering I'm remembering, yeah, and they're more keto
Yeah,
based.
they are they're coconut, hemp seeds, chia seeds, chlorella, spirulina.
Mm.
They do have a little MCT oil in them because of the texture. We're trying to get them to hold together and not crumble. And then what else is in there? I think that's it. And it's just like, 2 grams of sugar naturally occurring from your coconut mostly, and then like 13 or 14 grams of protein.
How do we buy? I'm on your website. I can't find where to buy your bars.
There should be a little thing in there. If you go to unstoppablebars.com, you find them
Unstoppable
there. But
bars. Okay.
usually, we just recently changed it. If you click on the blog, where it says blog, you'll see on the side, you'll see a little thing. I think he didn't put it on the main site. I think it's just
Okay.
not finished yet.
Okay, under
Yeah,
the
but if you
blog.
click on the blog, you'll see off to the side, you'll see the Unstoppable bars.
Okay, great. Great. I'm always about finding those in the emergency in case of
Yes,
emergency
emergency.
break
I carry
glass.
those emergencies. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Right, right, right. You know, being a mom on the go, everything's crazy, and if I can just, that's the one thing. It's like I'm really good most of the time cooking from home, and it's just those emergency times when it's like I just did back-to-back interviews, I'm exhausted, I don't feel like cooking, or I have to run and pick up our son and take him to somewhere else, and it's just making sure we fill in the gaps and knowing ourselves, knowing where we normally um, go off the rails. And so something like having a box of bars in the car, not that we want it to eat bars every day, but just having that kind of thing in the car, that would be fantastic. Just to make sure that we can somewhere between picking up our son and taking him to whatever class and coming home, and he loves bars too. And we always do something obviously like whole food based, but it's easy to also give your kid a bar too.
It is. It is. And we can make them and we all can
Oh,
have all
sure.
the good intentions to be making them all the time, but it don't always work out.
Right, exactly. That's
Yeah,
the emergency part, is that,
exactly.
not having put the time aside for it. Right.
Yeah.
Well, so
I
this
tried to call it an emergency bar, but they said the FDA wouldn't let me do it. Emergency meal bar, No, they said you
right,
can't do it.
right, because they might think it's like an environmental emergency, like an earthquake or
You're right.
something.
You're burning. Yeah, or that you're about to die because of something, and you
Oh
take
yeah,
this. You
right.
think it's
The
going to save
911
the
bar.
emergency instead of calling 911. Yeah, exactly, exactly. All righty.
Oh, that's funny. Awesome. Well, it has been such a pleasure having you on the show. And of course, I clicked blog to find your bar, and now my I'm face to face with this keto lime pie with chocolate crust recipe.
Oh my God, that was so good.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so we've got to definitely make sure that listeners are checking out your blog with the delicious but fun and healthy recipes. I
Yes,
love it. I love it. Anything we
yes.
can do to help with the transition, like, we don't have to eat zoodles. You could just eat. I just sometimes reach into the fridge, take a zucchini and start eating it. Like, just wash it and
Yeah,
just start. I
I've done
mean,
that too.
sometimes I do not even, have the time to cut it up. I'm just gonna eat the zucchini.
Just eat it.
Right? Just eat
It's
it.
always good if you have a dip. I always tell people keep some kind of dip in the fridge at all times, whether it's a pesto or a guacamole or zucchini hummus. Have you ever made
Mm,
zucchini hummus? You just use zucchini instead of chickpeas in your hummus
oh
and
my
do all
gosh.
the rest of it the same. And it's amazing. And you can dip a zucchini into zucchini hummus. I mean, it's not
Do you
considered,
cook the zucchini
incestuous.
first?
Do I cook it? No, I
So
don't.
it's like a raw dip,
Yeah, it's
basically.
a raw dip.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
cool.
could
Well,
if you want to, but you don't have
right.
to.
Yeah, I was just thinking it would be a bit more like what's that eggplant dip where they cooked egg?
Baba ganoush.
Yeah, baba ganoush, that's right.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm really excited to join I'm going to be in your group. I'm definitely going to do your
good challenge.
challenge. I think that's going to be a
Good.
lot of
Yay.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks so much for coming on the show and
you're
laying
welcome.
this out. This has been great.
You're
Is there
welcome.
anything that you'd like to say that has been left unsaid, or is there anything you'd like to say to wrap up today's interview?
We've been talking for hours and it's been awesome. And I think you hit on just about everything I would want to say. It's just that, don't take this lightly, that this is your health. You get this body, this one body, maybe you have belief in reincarnation, but it ain't going to be the same body. So enjoy it, take care of it while you're here, and do the best you can because nothing tastes as good as healthy feels. Nothing tastes as good as healthy feels. And when you can feel, I love the way I feel all the time, and I want more people to experience this because you won't be thinking about Twinkies or M&Ms anymore. You're thinking about, when can I have my next zucchini? Because I want to keep feeling this way.
That's a good motivation for getting over the initial cravings. I'm sure
Yeah,
I'm gonna cover this in your
we are.
course,
We are.
how to get over those cravings initially when people get off of the sugar and get off of the
Yeah.
carbs and all that. I know that you'll be teaching that in your program, because we could do a whole other episode on that, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we could.
Well, I'd love to
But
have you back anytime you want to come back and teach. It's such a pleasure
awesome.
to have you here. So thank you so much for coming here today, Dr. Ritamarie. And I'll make sure that everything that we've talked about today, all the links to everything you do, are going to be in the show notes of today's podcast. I will
Beautiful.
definitely be seeing you soon in your keto challenge.
Yay, yeah, because I'll be doing live Facebook Lives every day with Q&A, and every day you'll get a video from me that tells you what to do today. I'm trying to do it slowly, but this is the thing. Everybody's like, where's my recipes? Where's my this? Like, it doesn't start till Thursday. I was gonna like, let's transition slowly, so you don't hit me in the head because you just had to give up so many things. But no, everybody's just, we have almost 5,000, I think, and I think we have like 4,400 or
Nice.
something so far. I expect over 5,000 by the time we start, and people are excited.
I'm excited. Awesome. All right. Well, let's do it.
All right,
See
thanks.
you in your Facebook group.
See you soon.
Are you looking to optimize your health? Are you looking to get the best supplements at the lowest price? For high quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com, and one of our fantastic true health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program.